Hello everyone and welcome to today's Scribe webinar. My name is Paul Varley. I'm a product marketing manager at Scribe, and today I'm going to be talking about the anatomy of an iPaaS, how Scribe Online works. Before we start, I've got just a few housekeeping items that we should cover before we begin. The audio for the webcast is only available on the internet. There is no dial-in, so make sure that you're connected to the audio with your computer. We've got about 25 minutes of content today, and we will be recording it. In fact, we'll send you a link to the recording in an email after the webinar. And you'll notice that there are a number of icons and links at the bottom of the screen. These allow you to do things like change the level of your sound, ask questions, join the discussion on Twitter. You can download a copy of the slide deck, and there's a little bit of information about me on there as well. Now, you can go ahead and submit your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll address those at the end. So I'm not going to stop in the middle to answer questions, but we'll just take those at the end. All right, let's get started. I realize that some of you may not be familiar with the term iPaaS, so I wanted to start out by defining it. iPaaS stands for Integration Platform as a Service, and as you might suspect, it's basically an integration offering that's available as a cloud service. It's typically subscription-based. Like most cloud services, you pay for it on a monthly or annual basis. And one of the common misconceptions about iPaaS is that they're only for cloud-to-cloud integration. In most cases, that's not true. Most iPaaS platforms, like Scribe Online, do handle integration with on-premise systems, both cloud to on-premise as well as on-premise to on-premise. And we'll look a little bit later at exactly how that works. One of the main benefits of an iPaaS is distributed processing. Workloads are distributed throughout the network, either in the cloud or down to your on-premise environment. And again, we'll get back to a little bit about how that works and how it's possible. In most cases, an iPaaS allows you to create your own connector, right? With Scribe Online, we've got lots of connectors for lots of different things, but you might have a custom application or one that's just not very common. You can create your own connector to talk to that. And most iPaaS platforms are also going to have an API available that allows you to both monitor your integration jobs and also control things via API calls. And for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to be using Scribe Online, which is Scribe's iPaaS, as an example to illustrate the concepts that we're talking about. But for the most part, most of the things that I'm talking about are pretty standard capabilities of other iPaaSes that you might run into. Okay, so the way that we're going to do this today is we're going to go through and look at different aspects of an iPaaS in turn, and then at the end we'll build all these concepts up into an overall anatomy or architecture that will hopefully give you a really good and clear understanding of how things work. And what we're going to start with is the concept of organizations and users. As a multi-tenant environment or platform, an iPaaS has, of course, different tenants in it, and we refer to those as organizations. And, of course, it has users, because people have to be in there doing work, creating things, and so forth. Scribe Online is a little bit unique in that each user can belong to one or more organizations. So unlike a lot of multi-tenant systems where you'd have to have different credentials for each tenant that you belong to, in Scribe Online you just have one set of credentials that represent you as the user, and then you can belong to different organizations, and the organizations that you belong to can change over time. This is a great capability for people like integration consultants who work with lots of different clients and need the ability to go in and out of different organizations. It means that you don't have to have all different types of credentials for that. You've got one set of credentials that give you access to all of those. And organizations in Scribe Online come in three different types. There's a regular organization that's used for most of our end user customers. And then there's parent and child organizations. Those are used in a wholesale situation where a company is using Scribe Online as the underlying integration platform for some other product, usually a cloud application for it to integrate with other things. And those customers use the parent organization to administer their own customers, and each of their customers has a child organization. Now, as I'm going to be doing throughout the presentation, I'm going to switch between the slides and the Scribe Online user interface so that I can illustrate what we've been just talking about. So you should see the Scribe Online UI now in my screen share, and you can see that user information is available here in the My Account menu. It's got some basic information about the user, and then organizational aspects are in this menu over here. This drop-down list shows all of the organizations that I belong to and allows me to easily switch between one organization and the other without logging out and logging back in. You can see that I even belong to a parent organization, and when I expand that, it shows me all of the child organizations that exist underneath it. Okay, let's switch back to the slides and go on to the next concept. So next we'll talk about services. Scribe Online has 3 different services. The integration service is the main kind of generic integration capability that we offer. It's a two-way service in the sense that all of the systems that you're connecting to can be both either source or a target, and you can mix and match. You can have multiple connections in each of your integration maps, and there are different ways to kick off a job. It can be based on query or triggered externally. The replication service is really a one-way offering that will create a copy of the data that you have in either Salesforce, Microsoft Dynamics CRM, or Marketo, and take not really a snapshot, but maintain a real-time copy of that in a database that you provide. That database can be in the cloud or on-premise. That's up to you. And all you really have to do there is select the objects or entities that you want replicated. Scribe Online goes ahead and creates the appropriate tables in your database, does the initial load, and then as changes occur, create, update, delete type things, it's going to go ahead and make those changes in the database. So that's often used for analytics. If you're using a BI tool, you can then point that at the database instead of trying to access all the data through the API of the CRM system. And then finally, the third service is a migration service. This is really for partners who specialize in migrations. It's really a wholesale service. We do have short-term licenses for the integration service. So if you're an end user, you want to do a migration, you can use one of those short-term licenses of integration service to do your migration. So the next concept we want to look at is the connectors. And a connector is simply a piece of code that links an application, database, or a file system to Scribe Online. So we have connectors for all of the major CRM systems, marketing automation systems, accounting packages, databases, file systems, and so forth. And the connector is the piece of code that translates all of the common language that we use within Scribe Online into specific API calls, or in the case of a database, SQL statements for that specific endpoint. So it runs the gamut, everything from the credentials that you need to access that system, discovery of metadata, and that would include things like custom objects, custom fields, and so forth. The connectors understand how to execute a query against the system when we're trying to get records back. That includes filtering for getting only a subset of the records. Things like records that have changed, for example, would fall into that category of filtering. Some connectors support what we call inbound messaging, and that's the case where you have an application that has the ability to send an outgoing webhook to a source. We provide a URL that catches those messages and then sends them through a map. Connectors also do things like create, update, upsert, delete type operations. So when you're working with a system as a target, that's where you get into those CRUD operations. And for any systems that have bulk APIs, the connector is responsible for that as well. It's going to be batching up records and sending them together to make more efficient use of the API calls. And within the Scribe Online user interface, you've got the marketplace, which is where you go ahead and access those connectors. So I'll give you a quick look at how that works. So if I'm back on the dashboard here, you can see the navigation bar at the top has an option called Marketplace. And when I click on that, I see all the list of publicly available connectors that I can choose from. And when I scroll down the list, I see that there are some that have a green check box next to it. That just means that that connector is installed in this particular organization. And when I click on a connector, you see some more information on the right-hand side. And let me choose one that I don't have installed yet. We'll choose the Sugar CRM connector. And installing that in my organization is just as simple as clicking the Install button. And once I've done that, that connector is then available for use in the organization. All right, so the next concept, now that we understand what connectors are, the next logical thing to go to is connections. And a connection is a specific instance of a connector, if you will. So I just installed the Sugar CRM connector in my organization, but it doesn't connect to anything until I provide the credentials that I need to talk to a specific instance of Sugar CRM, whether in the cloud or on-premise. And so when I create a connection, I put in those credentials that allow me to connect, and Scribe Online will save that information. And connections are reusable within an organization, so you really only have to create a connection one time, and then you can use it again and again. In fact, you can even use it across services. So I could have a replication service that is connecting to a SQL Server database as a target, and then I can use that same connection in an integration service map as a source. If I want to pull some information out of that database and use it for something else, I can use that very same connection. And let's take a look at how that works. Share my screen again, and again back to the navigation bar. If I look at the More menu, I see connections there, and list of the connections that I have in this organization, one for a CRM system, one for a marketing system, and adding a new one is as simple as clicking the plus button, selecting the connector type, and then giving it a name and filling in the credentials that I need. In the case of Salesforce, it would be the URL, which we provide for you, username, password, security token, and then some choices about how to deal with things like bulk APIs and deleted records. So I can test that on an agent, which of course is a concept that we haven't arrived at yet, but we'll hold that thought for a moment. And after that test is successful, I just click OK, and my new connection is created and available in Scribe Online. Okay, so that leads me into agents. I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that iPaaS platforms have the benefit of distributed systems. So that allows them both to scale, and it also provides high availability because the agent operation is typically independent of the cloud, or what we call semi-autonomous in the case of Scribe Online. So you can think of an agent as just the thing that does the integration work that you've designed. So you use the cloud and the cloud user interface to create your integration maps, schedule them, and then once that is defined, the cloud will send instructions down to the agent. And the agent is going to perform those integration tasks, typically on a schedule that you set, and report the results back up to the cloud. So you can see what has happened by logging in from anywhere on the internet. Agents are semi-autonomous in the sense that if there's any kind of break in communication between the cloud and the agent, the agent will just go ahead and continue to do the work that it has according to the schedule that you've given it. And then when the communication is reestablished, it goes ahead and sends the results of those tasks back to the cloud where it's visible again. And there are two types of agents in Scribe Online. We have cloud agents and on-premise agents. Cloud agents are simply agents that reside within the Scribe Online cloud. So when you're integrating two different cloud systems or you're replicating from a CRM to a cloud database, you don't need to install anything in your own network. You can simply use a cloud agent in the Scribe cloud to do the work for you. So typical use case would be something like integrating Salesforce with Marketo. Those are both cloud applications, so you can use a cloud agent. On-premise agents come into the picture when you have a system or a database that is sitting behind a corporate firewall. Now in that case, a cloud agent is not going to be able to reach down in and talk to that system, so you need to deploy an on-premise agent behind that firewall that's going to be able to talk to those systems. And you would use a cloud agent in the case where whenever you have an on-premise system that you're involved in a map. I should note that when you're using a cloud agent, of course, the data is going to flow through the Scribe cloud. We don't save anything, but it does make that transit. So an on-premise agent has the additional security benefit that you can keep the data within your own sphere of influence or within your own security domain, especially in the case where you are integrating on-premise systems. In that case, the actual data is never going up to the cloud. It's only sending information about what happened back to the cloud. And you can have one or more agents per organization. Of course, you need at least one to do the integration work. But you can install multiple agents if you wish, and that allows you to, again, distribute workloads across multiple servers, if you like. And if I go back to the Scribe Online UI, I can show you what agents look like. Back to the More menu, you've got this agent drop-down item, and you can see in this organization I have one on-premise agent installed. It's giving me some statistics about its health, the last time it contacted the cloud, and so forth. To add a new one, I just click the plus button, and it gives me a choice whether I want a cloud agent or another on-premise agent, and then I can go through, in the case of a wizard, I go through a brief. In the case of an on-premise agent, I go through a brief wizard that allows me to download and install that agent locally. Next topic that we have for you today is maps and solutions. This is really the heart of any iPaaS, if you will, because this is where you define the logic that you are working with your connections. And a solution is very simply a set of maps that run in a set order. And they can run either on demand, meaning through the user interface or via API calls, or they can be scheduled to run on a periodic basis. And the agent will then take responsibility for executing that solution according to the schedule that you've created. We have a graphical designer for creating maps, and there are three different types of maps. There's a query map that goes out to a source system and brings back a set of records that it's going to act on, usually with a filter. We have message maps that each message map has a unique URL associated with it, and you can put that URL into a source system and that indicate that when there's something interesting available, it can then deliver that message to that URL. That's going to instruct the agent to start running the map and process the results. Message maps are asynchronous in the sense that they are listening for records coming in, but they just give a simple acknowledgement. They don't keep the connection open until the record is finished processing. And that's really the difference between message maps and request reply maps. Request reply maps are synchronous. You've got a message coming in, and then that's going to kick off an execution of a map. But The request reply map has the added capability of sending a result back to the system that called the map via that unique URL that I mentioned. And so that's useful for creating complex logic, encapsulating it in the map, and then exposing it essentially as a REST API that you can call and then get results back, even if it involves talking to multiple systems. And maps also have a debugger within Scribe Online that helps you figure out what's going on when your logic gets complex and you're not getting necessarily the result that you expect. So let me give you a quick view of the mapping environment. So I mentioned solutions. There is a solutions page that you can access at the top of the navigation bar. And then when I open up a solution, it's got information like the schedule that it's going to run on and the maps that are involved. So this solution has a single map in it, and this is the mapping canvas that I mentioned. This map has two connections, one to the CRM system, one to the marketing system. Each of the blocks in here represent one of the operations that connector is capable of doing. So I've talked about the query, but there's also things like create, update, delete, lookup, fetch, and so forth. So those are the tan and yellow blocks. The blue blocks are control blocks, and this is how you build up the logic in your map. So this is a very simple map that begins with a query. I can define all the parameters of the query over here, and then for each result or each record that comes back from the query, I'm going to go through this loop. There's only one block in here right now, which is the create block that allows me to add the customer that the query found into a marketing campaign. But if I want to, I can add additional blocks to the map by simply dragging and dropping those things in there. Let's say I wanted to do the lookup in the marketing system and do some different things based on what the result of that was. I would simply drag those blocks into the mapping canvas, and then the little red exclamation point tells me that I need to provide some more information over here before I can go ahead and save the map, because it doesn't necessarily make sense until I put those additional parameters in there. So that's kind of maps and solutions in a nutshell. Next concept that we want to talk about is the monitoring and notifications. So if you think about it in terms of lifecycle management, at the beginning you'll be creating all of your solutions, doing your scheduling, creating your maps, getting things set up. But once you've got your integrations up and running, you need the capability to keep track of what's happened and address any issues that might come up. And we provide both the capability to monitor the integrations that you defined, but we can also notify you when certain things happen. You've got some control over what kind of notification happens. So under the monitoring category, you might have noticed that the solutions page had a section at the bottom for execution history. Every time a solution runs and the agent reports the results back to the cloud, we're going to add a row in that execution history that's going to keep track of the number of records processed, if there were any record failures and other information. We store that information for 45 days, and it's available not only through the UI, but also through the API. So you can monitor it through an external source if you want, just by polling our API to get that data back. Email notifications are unique to each organization that you belong to, and so you can get email notifications for things like system updates that are coming, job and record failures, connector installation, and if your agent is having trouble communicating with the cloud. So let's take a quick look at those. I know we're starting to run up against the 25-minute boundary that I talked about earlier, but I want to make sure I show a little bit of this to you. So if I go to execution history here, or better yet, I'll start in the solutions page, because I mentioned this when I was doing the slide there. Down at the bottom of the execution of the solutions page, I've got the history of all of the times that this solution has run in the last 45 days. And I can see things like how many records were processed, how many records per second that was, whether any failed, and then the gear menu allows me to look at other details if there are errors, and I can also reprocess records that failed if there were any of those. For notifications, those are up in the My Account menu, and that just shows me a row of checkboxes for each organization that I belong to, and at the top you have 6 columns for the 6 different things that I talked about, and you can select different settings for each organization that you belong to. So it allows you to customize that and get the email notifications that you want to see in there. Okay, so with that, I think we're almost ready to tie it all together. There's one more topic that I wanted to cover before we get to that, and that is the API and connector development. Scribe Online has a software development kit for building connectors. In fact, there are 2 different ways to do this. There's a fast connector framework that's useful for simple connectors. You can build a connector in just a couple of hours with that. And then there's a full SDK that provides all of the platform functions. In fact, it's what we use to build our own connectors, and we make that available to third parties who want to build their connectors as well. Scribe Online has a full REST API as well. That's useful when you want to automate processes. You might want to, like I was just saying a minute ago, you might want to pull execution history for errors and things like that. You can do that by making API calls. You might even want to run solutions on a schedule that you set or in response to some other event that happens. You can do that through API calls. In fact, you can even embed Scribe in your own UI. We have partners who've done that because our user interface is all built on top of the API. So everything that you see in the user interface is available as an API call, and you can go ahead and create your own skin on top of the platform if you want to do that. Okay, so lastly, I just wanted to sort of tie all of this together and just walk through all the pieces in the broader whole. So in the upper left corner, you've got the HTML5 Scribe Online user interface that is accessing the cloud through its API. That's the user's view into the system. Likewise, in the upper right, if you have a third-party SaaS application that's embedded Scribe Online, that is also going to be talking to the cloud through the API. And the API is one of several different shared components that are shared across all organizations or all the tenants in the cloud. And that would include the connectors that you saw in the marketplace, the API, and the software development kit that you use to build connectors. Now, just below that, you've got a number of tenant-specific components. So some of the things that we talked about are specific to one organization or another. They are in a particular organizational bucket, if you will. And that includes connections, maps, solutions, and execution history. So when I switch back and forth from one organization to another, I'm going to see different things related to those 4 different categories. So that's kind of the architecture of the cloud. The other piece of the cloud in the lower right is the cloud agents. So those are really the same code as an on-premise agent. They just happen to live in the Scribe cloud, and we maintain that for you. So you don't have to worry about anything, really. You just click a button in the UI, and then the cloud agent is available to you. On the lower right-hand side, the lower left-hand side, you've got on-premise agents, which you're installing on your customer site, and those can talk to applications and databases behind your firewall. And both cloud and on-premise agents are talking to the Scribe ecosystem of all the different things that we connect to through the connections that you define. All right, so with that, in summary, that's kind of the architecture or anatomy of the Scribe Online iPaaS. If you want to learn some more or you want to try it out for yourself, we do offer a free trial. If you follow that link, you can fill out a form and we'll provision a Scribe Online user for you and an organization with a 15-day trial. We offer a white paper that complements this webinar, so if you follow that link, you can download and read the webinar. And then if you have further questions, you can go ahead and contact us at sales@scribesoft.com. And I believe all these links are going to be in the email that we send out following up to the webinar. So you can do that. It's also available in the resources section at the bottom of your screen. So with that, I know I went probably a full 30 minutes instead of 25 like I planned, but hopefully you're able to stay on with us, and we'll take some of your questions here. I'm going to open up the question box, and let's see, what do we have here? So the first question is, do you need an on-premise agent to connect to a file in a file system? That's a great question. The answer is not necessarily. In some cases, you can connect to a file system with a cloud agent. And specifically, those would be Dropbox and OneDrive, because those are accessible through the cloud. So let's say, for example, that you have a file that you want to work with and you've got Dropbox installed. You can put that file in the Dropbox, and then it's going to be available for processing with a cloud agent. If we're talking about an on-premise file system for a server, if you will, then yes, you would need an on-premise agent to connect to that one. Okay, next, what is an agent heartbeat? That's another good question. I think you probably noticed that in the notifications section. So the heartbeat is really just the communication that goes back and forth periodically between each agent and the cloud, and that's how the cloud knows whether the agent is available and in communication. For the specific situation that I mentioned, where you've got an agent installed behind a firewall, it needs to reach out and send a message to the cloud periodically to let it know that it's operational. Okay, next question. What is the roadmap for Dynamics 365 for operations? We do have a connector available for that. It might be called Dynamics AX connector in the marketplace, but it is compatible with Dynamics 365 for operations. Next question, can ScribeSoft automatically build a target schema in SQL Server when we set up a replication from Dynamics CRM? Yes, in fact, it does do that. That's one of the features of the replication service. So you don't have to worry about the schema in the target database. We create that and maintain it. So if there's a new table that you're adding to your replication, we'll go ahead and create that new table in the database. Next question, is there a charge for Scribe Labs connectors? So you might have noticed that some of the connectors in the marketplace are labeled as Labs connectors. There is no cost for that, and in fact, they are not counted in your subscription as well. So you're free to use them. You don't pay for the connector, and you don't pay anything extra to use the connection with your subscription. So there's another question about which infrastructure platform is being used, and if so, if it's Microsoft, is it available in Government Cloud? Scribe Online is built on top of Microsoft Azure, and it is not currently available in Government Cloud, but it is something that we are looking at. So I would say stay tuned for further information on that from us later. Next question, is the Scribe Online subscription based on a single monthly or annual subscription, or is it based on transactions, connections, organizations, or what? Great question. So the one thing that is not, of the things that you mentioned that's not taken into account is transactional volume. You can process as many records as you want. So if this usually becomes an issue when you're talking about marketing automation platforms because they generate so much data. You can, no matter what tier of service you're on, you can run as many records as you want. The pricing is based on an annual subscription, and the tiers are really based on two things: what you're connecting to and the number of connections that you need. So there are a number of tiers, and in the lower tiers you have fewer connectors available. In the higher tiers you start to get into the more enterprise applications like Dynamics AX and so forth, and then you also have more connections available. The higher tiers also give you test and development organizations. So at the lower tiers you've got one organization that you work with. In the higher tiers you have multiple organizations, so you can do your development and testing in separate organizations and then move your solutions from development to test to production. And if you have specific questions about that, definitely email us at sales@scribesoft.com and we can look into your specific situation and help you understand what would be the appropriate tier that you'd want to be on. There's another question about security concerns in terms of moving sensitive data. I mentioned earlier that if you use an on-premise agent, you can ensure that your data is not passing through the Scribe Cloud at all. And there's another feature that allows you to even store failed records on the agent and not send them up to the cloud. So when you have it set that way, you're not going to be, or Scribe won't be privy to any of that information. Of course, it's for all these systems that support encryption, which is most of the systems that we have connectors for, we're going to be encrypting data back and forth. So as it's in transit, it's going to be encrypted. And again, if you have specific questions about that, we can just contact us and we'll help you understand that particular scenario that you have. Next question, what's the average time required to build a custom connector? That's a great question. And what kind of developer would I need? So all of the SDK and the FAST framework that I mentioned are in Microsoft Visual Studio. So you would need a C# developer. Now, when you're talking about the FAST framework, you don't even really need a very sophisticated developer, because while you do need Visual Studio to open the project, it walks you through a wizard that helps you to build the connector, and you can really build a simple one, in a matter of hours. For a more complex one, it can certainly get into months of effort. Like if you wanted to build one as sophisticated as, say, our Salesforce or our Dynamics CRM connector, that would certainly be a multi-month effort. But we'd be happy to discuss your particular project with you and then go from there. So let's see, maybe one more question. I know we're running a little bit over time, but thank you for sticking with us, and thanks for all of these great questions that we're getting. So another question: how does Scribe manage API call limits for different platforms? The connector doesn't necessarily know how many API calls you have available. If you're concerned about that, the best thing to do is to use the bulk API feature or use inbound messaging. So one of the areas where this tends to come up is in Salesforce, because they do have hard limits on the number of API calls that you can make. And so that's where we recommend, if possible, use outbound messaging for sending data out of Salesforce into a map, because in Salesforce, outbound messages do not count against your API quota. And then for any target operations, you want to use the bulk API. So you can batch up as many as many records in one API call as possible. Let's see, so there's a reference to the Microsoft Power BI offering, pulling data from Sugar CRM and Marketo or SQL Server. So I think that's a reference to something that Microsoft offers, where they're using our replication service to replicate dynamic CRM or Salesforce data to a SQL Server database and then pointing Power BI at the SQL Server. So the part of your question that's about SQL Server, the answer is yes, you could do that. They don't currently have anything for Sugar CRM or Marketo, at least not the last I checked. So we offer replication for Marketo, so you could do the same sort of thing, but you'd have to build your own solution template within Power BI. That's not something that Microsoft offers as far as I know. And then just confirmation on something I said. Did you say that a developer can build a custom connector using Visual Studio and C#? Yes, that's what the SDK is. So yes, you can do that. And then next, with the heartbeat notification, is there a way you can stop email notifications, especially when your trial version is expired? Yes, you should be able to go ahead and log into your Scribe Online account, whether your organization has a subscription or not. You should be able to go to that notification section that I showed in the My Account menu and uncheck the box for heartbeat notification. You should also be able to delete the agent, if I'm not mistaken. But if you're having any trouble with that, please do go ahead and contact our support, and we'd be happy to help you sort that out. Okay, so I think that is about it for the questions. So with that, I will thank you so much for your time, and we hope to see you again at the next Scribe webinar.